One of the most common problems you'll face when mixing vocals is dealing with harshness and excessive sibilance, and one of the best ways to treat that problem is to use a de-esser. In today's video, I'm going to break down how I approach using a de-esser in my vocal mixes to tame harsh vocals and treat sibilance, and I'm going to show you how to do the same. Are you ready? Let's go. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is your boy 5-Piece producer and engineer extraordinaire. Thank you for checking out this video, and a good place to start is to define what a de-esser is and what it's supposed to treat. And later on in this video, I'm going to break down how to set up a de-esser on a problematic vocal step by step so that there's no mistaking it. You're going to be able to fix your harshness and sibilance issues. A de-esser is essentially a form of multi-band compression. So really it's a compressor, but it's focused on a specific frequency range, and that frequency range is usually responsible for the harshness or sibilance on a vocal. By sibilance, I'm referring to things like S's, T's, CH's, and other things of that nature that really poke out and can be hurtful or harmful to the ears if they're just not balanced correctly. And unfortunately, these problems stick out a lot more on top of other vocal sounds or other words, consonants, etc. So these words or these phrases, these sounds, we really want to treat using a de-esser, and the problem range really varies. It could be as low as 2,000 or 3,000 hertz to as high as 14,000 hertz. It's really going to depend on the vocalist and where their voice ultimately sits on the frequency spectrum and where these problems lie within their vocals. So it's always going to be different depending on the person, but don't you worry, I'm going to show you how to locate this in the coming sections. Now, that being said, another question that people ask is where should they put a de-esser in their chain? And I think it's important to cover this before we begin, because a lot of times people will just bring up a de-esser and not necessarily need it at that time or just not really know what they're doing. So it's really creating more problems. Everything that you should be doing in mixing should really be a product of knowing the problem and then addressing that problem with the process that you're using, and a de-esser is no different. In this case, you want to put a de-esser on right when you hear the issue. So what I mean by that is if you're mixing a vocal and before doing any processing, you're already hearing excessive S's and sibilance or harshness, you probably want to put a de-esser on really early on, if not right at the beginning of the chain, to treat this problem. However, maybe you're listening to the vocal as you're mixing it and you don't really hear any issues, but then as you put on certain processes, maybe you do a high shelf boost with an EQ, or maybe you do some compression and all of a sudden the vocal is sounding a little bit more harsh, maybe the frequency spectrum is changed a little bit as a result of these moves, that's obviously where you're going to want to put the de-esser, is after that process that has changed the frequency response. So it's really going to depend. I like to usually put it on early in the chain if the S's and other stuff is harsh right from the beginning, or I'll put it later on towards the end if another process brings out that problem as a result. Truthfully, sometimes I'm doing a little combination of both, and I'm going to show you an example of that right now. So here I am in Pro Tools, and I have a session here. It's a song called Thessaloniki. You might recognize it from some of my previous tutorials, but you're going to see that I have a de-esser very early on the hook here, and I also have a second de-esser later on in the chain. So I have two de-essers that are splitting up the work, and the truth is the S's were somewhat of a problem early, so I used the de-esser to treat them then. I did some additional processing, including adding a higher shelf boost on this vocal, which reinvigorated the S problem and the harshness problem. So I treated it again with a second de-esser. So just to show you what I'm talking about, I'm going to bypass these de-essers and just play this vocal through. Take a listen and I'll put them in. You can hear the difference with and without.
Next time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki with a thing that's freaky and she always need me up. Next time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki with a thing that's freaky and she always need me up. Next time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki with a thing that's freaky and she always need me, yeah. Next time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki with a thing that's freaky and she always need me, yeah.
So to be fair, this vocal is not the worst in terms of harshness and sibilance. However, there was still a bit of a S poking out there. Sometimes you would say next time, right? The next into the time. That kind of pokes out with the T. Thessaloniki, there's S's in that phrase. There are certain phrases that just have a little bit more harshness as a result, as you could tell. So treating it with the de-esser is ultimately the best play here. And I'm going to show you how to do this step by step right now. Now, the first step is you want to find a section of the vocal that contains a lot of sibilants. We're talking S's, T's, CH's, things of that nature, and you're going to want to loop it. So we're ultimately going to use this section as a way to just set up the de-esser and know that it's working properly. And then from there, we're ultimately going to zoom out and listen to it in the context of the whole song. But first things first, we want to just dial in the sound, and we need to be able to find a section that will allow us to do that effectively, because the de-esser, again, is only going to affect or recognize certain frequencies over others, and those frequencies are typically S's, T's, and things in that upper mid-range area. So in my case here, I have a duplicate of the vocal here that we're just going to focus on. It's going to be soloed, and if I just go here, these first two bars should be quite enough for me to notice or be able to at least detect the problem of harshness or sibilance.
Next time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki with a thing that's freaky and she always need me.
So obviously that section should be good enough to at least be able to set up the de-esser from there. Now, once you have that selected, you can then move on to the next step, which is to find the sibilant frequency of this selection. So of course you need to put on a de-esser. However, you can also use an EQ to discover this. But with a de-esser, and I'm using the FabFilter Pro DS here, if I look here, this is my frequency range down here that I can essentially select. This is what's ultimately going to be reduced by the de-esser, okay? If I press audition, I can now just solo and focus on this specific problem, right? This frequency that I have selected, and I can expand it if I need to. So that being said, let's just play it and listen, and we should really just hear this particular frequency range. Here we go. This is really the high end, and we may want to adjust this selection. I actually have it being pretty narrow between a little bit more than 8, almost 9K and 14.5K. However, again, this is what I have selected here. We may want to adjust this. So let's actually broaden it. In fact, I recommend broadening it first so you can really hear what you're affecting. So if I do the full range from 2 to, let's say, 18, which is quite a broad gap here, let's just listen to that for a sec.
Next time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki with a thing that's freaky and she always need me.
So you can hear how that's a pretty broad range, and we're probably getting some stuff in there that we don't necessarily need to treat. Again, some vocalists, if they have lower voices or higher voices, it might depend, right? And you might need to have a lower frequency selection, but I find personally that usually around 4K and above is really where we want to focus for this vocal, for the de-esser. So let's hear this from 4 to 18.
Next time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki with a thing that's freaky and she always need me.
So that's better for sure, but we still have, I think, a little bit too much high-end stuff that we don't need. So I'm now going to bring this down. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to play it and do this in real time so we can hear how the selection is changing and hear how the focus using this audition button is changing.
Next time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki with a thing that's freaky and she always need me. Next time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki with a thing that's freaky and she always need me. Next time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki with a thing that's freaky and she always need me.
So I think somewhere around here from 4 to 10K is a pretty solid selection, okay? I definitely am getting a little bit more than the sibilants by going up, but I also know that the sibilants doesn't just live and concentrate in one specific area. Sometimes it does go a little bit higher up into the upper harmonics of a track. So that's why I have this selection of 4 to 10.5K. Now again, your selection might be different, so do something like this where you're auditioning and just soloing this frequency and able to hear what you're doing as you make this selection. And whether or not you're using the FabFilter Pro DS, most other de-essers have a similar functionality. It might just look a little bit different. For the third step, we're actually going to want to set the threshold. Now, what I want to do is I want to set the threshold because basically it's going to determine how much gain reduction is going to take place. It's going to let the de-esser know, hey, the vocal is too loud here in this range, let's reduce it now. So we're going to want to set this effectively, and the truth is you may want to push it at first just to make sure you can get a reaction and hear it, and then later you're going to want to back off. Now that being said, right now I have a range of 2, but I'm actually going to bump the range up to 6, so I'm going to exaggerate the range, okay? The range is actually the most amount of volume that you can lose, so even if I set the threshold up in a way where I should lose, let's say 12 or more dB of volume, because the range is set to 6, it's going to limit or prevent the de-esser from reducing it any more than 6 dB. So even though it should go down to minus 12, it's only going to go down to minus 6 at the most. So I'm doing this again on purpose just to exaggerate it and make sure that I'm getting the right reaction. And later on, what I could do is back off on the range. But that being said, let's dial in the threshold and take a listen. And what I might do as well is I might actually solo and audition the reduction. So we're only going to be able to hear what we are losing. But that being said, let's play this, set it up, and I'll do some A-Bing afterwards with the solo functions here.
This time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me, This time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me,
So you can hear when I solo it, you're hearing that it's pretty much just the S's. It's almost like whispering or murmurs in the background, right? At least when you solo it like that, which is a little bit weird, but of course we're obviously not going to be listening to it like that. We're just doing that to make sure that we're doing the right thing or that we're treating the right thing. And if you're paying attention, you see that we're getting sometimes upwards of about 4 dB in terms of gain reduction. Even though the range is set to 6, it's not necessarily going to push it to 6 either if we're underneath that. It's going to just reduce by whatever we think is appropriate. And the way that I'm setting this as well is I'm just listening. I'm using my ears and trying to determine by the threshold, does the sibilance sound less aggressive? Does it sound smoother, so to speak? If so, that's good. I don't want to push it too far, because at the same time, if we do push it too far, there is an extreme. And what that means is you're basically going to turn your vocal into having no S's or no sibilance. And what that sounds like is it sounds like a lisp, right? And that's obviously too much. We want to avoid having a lisp, but we do want to at the same time make sure we're processing it enough so that way it's actually doing something and we're getting enough gain reduction to smooth it out and reduce the noticeability of that harshness. Now, in saying that, we can go to step 4, which is adjusting the range. Okay, now I told you to push the range at first. I did a 6 dB range here, which is a little bit more aggressive, but I'm ultimately going to suggest that you actually back off on that. Now, first things first, use your ears. If 6 dB sounds fine, then it's fine. You don't have to reduce the range, or maybe you have to increase the range if it's not enough. We'll see. But if it sounds good and you don't think you need to adjust it, then don't. Okay, if you're getting the right reaction, and the right reaction should basically sound smooth, but at the same time transparent, where you're not getting a lisp or any kind of crazy action going on, well, then you probably can leave it. But in the event that it does sound maybe a little bit too aggressive or it's a little bit more noticeable than you'd like, back off on the range. I personally set my range for a De-Esser between 2 to 4 dB, the sweet spot really being 2 to 3. And usually a 1 to 2 dB move is fairly transparent on anything, whether it's a De-Esser, an EQ, or otherwise. And when you start going beyond that, it's a little bit more noticeable, but at the same time, these S's and the sibilants, it really does poke out quite a bit. So of course, you obviously want to address that using a De-Esser and using the range to cap exactly how loud that sibilance is. So that being said, let's play this exact same section, and I'm going to just back off on the range, probably in full dB increments, and let's just see how it sounds.
This time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me, This time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me, This time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me, This time you need me, I'll be in Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me,
Maybe I'm biased, but I did find that somewhere in that 2 to 3 range definitely felt a little bit better. It didn't feel like it was too aggressive. I think 6 could still fly and that would be fine, but ultimately that 2 to 3 range seemed to be the most appropriate in my opinion. And right now I have it set to about 3 dB. So that's ultimately what we're capping things at. Even though the threshold might want to limit it towards 4, it's actually going to cap it at 3. So it's not actually going to push it or reduce it by that much. Instead, it's going to reduce it by as much as 3 dB or less. That's the maximum reduction we'll be able to get as a result of this De-Esser. Now, the next step here is you're going to want to adjust the gain, okay? So you can adjust the input and the output. I don't find myself often adjusting the input because typically I'm putting this on after I've gain staged my vocal and I have things sitting where I need them to sit. So instead, I'm going to really focus on the output, and that's really only if I need to. And the reason why we'd want to do this is because this De-Esser is ultimately treating a very specific frequency range. In this case, it's an important fundamental. It's 4 to at 10.5 kilohertz. This is a really important range where we can really hear a vocal, its intelligibility, its presence. And what ends up happening is if you use a de-esser maybe too aggressively, or maybe not even too aggressively, but just in general, sometimes a de-esser can sort of make a vocal less shiny, less articulated, less upfront. Maybe darker is another way to describe it. I don't really have the perfect term for it, but sometimes I find that the vocal loses something when I put a de-esser on it. And the gain here is how we would ultimately make up for that loss or that lack of whatever we're losing in the sense of when we put this de-esser on. More often than not, I've put a de-esser on and then I've bypassed it. And without it, while it is harsh, it just sounds naturally better because it's not as suppressed. So really this makeup gain step is here to remedy that and hopefully bridge the gap where we're still able to treat the sibilance and the harshness, but at the same time not lose everything that we had going on prior to putting it on. Now that being said, you want to do this very delicately. So as an example, if we're losing 3 dB in this case, I don't necessarily think we're going to want to add 3 dB. We may only want to add 1 or 2 dB, maybe not even that much, because really it's going to benefit what's being reduced, but we got to remember that everything else that isn't in this range will also be turned up as a result of using this output gain, so we want to be careful. Now, I would personally do this with my ears, and if we need to, maybe use a metering plugin as well, so that way we can somewhat match what we are losing. So check this out. Let's just actually first use our ears, or at least attempt to. I'm going to play this and just turn this up, and I'm going to bypass and put it in and see, am I roughly matching what we are losing? Again, it's not going to be 100% perfect, but we just want to get it a little bit close, so that way when I put it on or take it out, there isn't any noticeable volume difference. The only difference is, of course, that the sibilance and harshness is treated. So check this out.
This time you need me, I'm being Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me, This time you need me, I'm being Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me, This time you need me, I'm being Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me, This time you need me, I'm being Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me, This time you need me, I'm being Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me, This time you need me, I'm being Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me, This time you need me, I'm being Thessaloniki.
So I find that I'm still making it a little bit too loud, where I'm really noticing the difference in the gain. So I've bumped it down to just a 0.25 dB. I want to see if this makes enough of a difference.
This time you need me, I'm being Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me, This time you need me, I'm being Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me, This time you need me, I'm being Thessaloniki. With a thing that's freaky and she always need me, This time you need me, I'm being Thessaloniki.
So yeah, somewhere between this 0.25 and 0.5, so really like a fraction of a dB seems to be the sweet spot. I think 0.25 is enough. Truthfully, you may not necessarily need to add anything here. I don't always do this, but if you do find that you're losing something in the process of doing this whole de-essing thing, you may want to consider adding a little bit of output here. However, at the same time, you could just avoid it altogether and then reset your gain or your volume fader as you add more plugins into your process. So now for the final step, you're going to want to actually listen to your entire track. So play through the entire thing and make sure that the de-esser is reacting appropriately, okay? While we are setting it around the busiest section or the section that has the most amount of the problem typically, we're ultimately going to want to double check and make sure that it's not doing some weird stuff later on. If you have a lot of vocals on your track, so, you know, I have this hook here, ultimately it's going to be affecting a little bit of this intro, and maybe there's some outro stuff or all the hooks, right? Maybe the hooks are a little bit different each time. Anything that's on that track is getting affected the same way by the de-esser, and we're ultimately going to want to make sure that the de-esser is functioning appropriately. And if it's doing too much, you may ultimately want to either separate those vocals onto another track and process them a little bit differently with its own unique de-esser, or you may want to do something like automating the threshold or some of the other parameters on the de-esser so that way it backs off and doesn't process them too aggressively. Or maybe it's the opposite problem. Maybe it should use a little bit more de-essing specifically, but it's not reacting the way that you want, so instead you would automate the threshold so that it reacts more aggressively. You can kind of see how there's a bunch of different permutations applications of this. But either way, we ultimately want to double check everything in terms of the full track, the full arrangement, and at the same time in context. While I have been soloing this for the sake of this example and this lesson, I definitely don't advise that you do this strictly in solo mode. Solo mode is not always the best because it creates biases. The end listener is not listening to the vocal on its own. They're listening to the vocal in the context of everything. And you definitely want to double check everything in the context with all the instruments, all the other tracks, everything else, and make sure that your decision making makes sense. Now, one additional thing that I kind of mentioned before, but just to really make sure you understand, while I did show you how to do this with one de-esser, and I'm showing you how to do certain moves with that on its own, I definitely advise that if your de-esser is reacting too aggressively, and if you're not liking what you're getting out of it, try to do what I did earlier, which is breaking it up into two distinctive steps, where you have two de-essers essentially working in series. It's going to sound a lot better, a lot more natural, right? You may not necessarily need to have them working so aggressively, so I might have a range of 1 or 2 on both of these. In this case, I have 2 and 3, but having two de-essers splitting the work is going to sound a lot more transparent because they're not going to be reacting as aggressively as if you had one that was, cranked to the max. If I had a range of 6, I'd rather have two de-essers with a 3 and 3 than one de-esser with a 6 range that's really squashing those certain problem spots, because that'll sound a lot more aggressive and noticeable. And the key to de-essers, or at least strategically de-essing, is to be careful and not do it so aggressively. One other thing that I should mention here is you can also see that I've gone in and I've cropped and clip gained certain things. So I believe this is an S as an example. This is another thing you may want to do if your de-esser is working a little bit more aggressively, or if you have sections of your arrangement that are not causing the de-esser to react the way that you want. You may want to actually go in and either clip gain up, so increase or decrease the S or the problem. Maybe it's a T, maybe it's a CH, but whatever it is, you're going to want to address that manually beforehand with clip gain in order for the de-esser to ultimately get the reaction that you want. That's something else that I often do. I will first of all be lazy and usually just try to apply the de-esser on its own and see if it can do most of the heavy lifting. But typically after I've done that, I will have to go into a vocal take and then of course address, just like I'm saying, turning things up or down. Usually down, because usually that S or T or whatever that sibilant problem is, that harsh problem, it might just be causing the de-esser to work a little bit harder or more aggressively than I would like. So I hope you got value out of this video. And to take it one step further, de-essing is a great way of treating harshness, but it's not the only way. In fact, I have a really popular video out there called How to Fix Harsh Vocals. I walk you through this exact process, but not only that, I show you several other ways to deal with harshness in your mix because it's such a common problem, and I think a lot of people struggle with that. So if you haven't seen that video yet, I'll leave a link to it in the corner right now, and I'll leave it in the description below for you to watch. Definitely recommend it because there's going to be a lot of strategies in that video that'll help you treat this very common problem. Now, that being said, if you got value out of this video, please smash that like button until it turns blue, so that way other people like yourself can see this. And not only that, but so that the YouTube algorithm could show you some more of my helpful content. I drop a new video just like this every single week, always focused on helping you sound better and helping you make more money with your music. It's 100% for free. The only thing that I ask is that you do the small thing, like the video, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to my channel so you can see this content when it goes live. I appreciate you guys for watching. If you want to see anything in a future video, leave it in the comments below, and I'm looking forward to helping you again on the next one. All right? Peace.
5.